Thank you. And so it's been a little bit, it's been a little while, and we still haven't really moved on to Daniel 8.
Oh, you're still in
I'm
7?
still on 7. Today I'm kind of doing something that's not necessarily Daniel 7. It's I kind of felt like doing a sort of like a framework of like what's going on in Daniel. The reason is that Daniel is going to, is even for the rest of the book, there's going to be two focuses that he has in his prophecy. We always, we tend to approach Daniel as like, what's going to happen in the future times, right? But there's two periods of history that he really focuses on most of all, and that is, the time where the temple gets desecrated uh, in the Greek era by Antiochus Epiphanes, and then later the coming of the Son of Man, and the coming of the kingdom in the Roman era. So if you remember, Daniel 2 was about that stone not made by human hands that comes, and you look at it and you're going, it looks like the Roman era, right? And then when you see the same thing with Daniel 7, when you see the four beasts, you're going to see again the Roman era. So everything points to the Roman era. Now, there's a significance to that because by the time you get to the Roman era and when Jesus is showing up, there's a big expectation from the book of Daniel. I mean, of course, the Jews have the book of Daniel, right? Now, the Sadducees, they didn't really regard the book of Daniel because all they regarded was the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah. But most groups were like, something's going to happen during this time. If we're looking at Daniel, something's going to happen, and it actually is one of the things that led to the revolt against the Romans, and it also led to a lot of false messiahs at the time, because a lot of people are going, I'm the Messiah, I'm the one who's going to do this, and the zealots were kind of looking for something to happen, and they had been emboldened because of what had happened in the other thing that Daniel predicted, which was in Antiochus Epiphanes, right? And so we'll kind of cover a little bit of that. This right here is like some old, um, picture of the this is the ransacking of Jerusalem and the temple, under Antiochus Epiphanes in the Greek era, right? I guess
Very European.
it's very European. This is Dutch. It says, let me see. It says Jerusalem van Antiochus Epiphanes overvallen, beroofd, den tempel verbrand met witboeken. So it says, Jerusalem, from Antiochus Epiphanes, taken over, the desecration, or the what do you call it? Not the abomin the desolation of the temple, and he burnt the books of the law, and uh, he brings in like the idolatry and idol worship, and lets many Jews um, into misery and mishandling or abuse, and death. So he did all kinds of nasty things to the Jews, and during that time, and we'll get into some of the details of that event later on. He actually desecrates the temple by off slaughtering a pig and forcing them to. He reverses circumcisions, which is like, I'm like,
What?
I don't even want to know what that looks like.
Yeah.
I guess he just had skin like sewn on,
Ah,
like
Mark.
the
Like a
nasty.
couple people or like a whole
No, he
group?
did all kinds of stuff. It was like, it was really grotesque. He was like crucifying women with like their babies around their necks, and the babies had been strangled, and it's just like, it was really, really gross, the stuff that he did. So horrible, horrible stuff. But the thing is there was an uprising by a group of Jews called the Maccabees, and they drove Antiochus Epiphanes and his men out there, and they ruled Judea. Judea was independent for about 100 years until the Romans took it over. So that's called the Maccabean Revolt. You can read about it in the Book of Maccabees, but that's where Hanukkah comes from. So it's the rededication of the temple. They rededicated the temple, and Jesus participated in that holiday, by the way, the rededication of the temple. Oh, really? Kind of like what became Hanukkah. That was like it's a Jewish celebration. So it was a big deal, you know. So they were encouraged by that, and they thought that like, well, now the Romans are here, and God's going to help us again. The only thing is that things got kind of turned on their head, and Jesus was starting to talk about the destruction of the temple, and he was connecting that idea, the destruction of the temple, to them rejecting him. So he's like, "You're rejecting me, and now your city's going to be, and your house is going to be left to you desolate." And you will know, and he's talking about the coming of the Son of Man. He's citing Daniel the whole time. So there's a way that Jesus sees Daniel's prophecies, and he's pertaining it to himself. Because first of all, he's calling himself the Son of Man, but he's also well, you'll see the connections kind of like as we go along, you know. So I'll give you a little bit of gross history every week, you know.
I love
you can,
so
the temple was destroyed during Daniel's time. So during Daniel's time, you do have, you know, the temple was already destroyed, and this is by Babylon, or this is the first temple was destroyed, Solomon's temple.
So it was already after Antiochus Epiphanes?
No, this is Antiochus Epiphanes is not yet. Okay, so Antiochus Epiphanes is in Daniel's future, but he's having visions of it.
But it's in between Daniel and Jesus.
Yeah, it's going to be between Daniel and Jesus, right? Yeah. So this is like the first temple has been destroyed, and he's out in exile, being held by you know, in Babylon. So you could say Judaism is on hiatus because the whole Judaic system was sacrifices, a priestly system. All of that's gone. Okay, so you could say that Judaism could not be practiced, and wasn't being practiced, and it's on hiatus. Okay.
What was going on in Jerusalem when they were in Babylon?
Well, while it was being ransacked, and what was happening is that the Babylonians were taking Jews out of there, leaving kind of like the poor and the people that they couldn't use as much, and then bringing in other people, like, and it's just, well, yeah, then there's kind of like a whole mixture and a mess of things going on, but basically it's just being left desolate. I don't know how many Jews are left like in Jerusalem, and all of the article, you know, the temple is burned down, and the articles have all been taken over to Babylon. So there's, you know, the priests, they're like in exile, and it's just everybody's just on exile. So Judaism, and the way that it was supposed to be practiced, let's just say the old covenant stuff, is gone. All the stuff that they were supposed to do basically is gone. So now this is the thing. Daniel knows that the temple will be rebuilt because Isaiah, first of all, has already prophesied that that it's going to last 70 years, right? So he's expecting. Now Daniel's in Babylon for like a little bit more than 70 years. And towards the end of that, he starts praying, and he's going, Lord, it's time to go back, right? So he knows that the temple is going to be rebuilt because of Isaiah's prophecy, and at least he knows that they're going to go back, right? But the second is that he's having visions himself. The thing is that he's having visions of the temple being desecrated again. So you go, in order for the temple to be desecrated, it has to be rebuilt again. Oh, gotcha. Okay, so one of the things that has got to be troubling Daniel is that the rebuilding of Jerusalem would occur, but that temple would again be subject to destruction. So he's like, okay, we're going to go back, but things aren't going to be like hunky-dory forever. So and he's seeing when these things are going to happen. One of them is like, just like, not the next king, the next kingdom is going to let them go back, right? But the kingdom right after that is something's going to happen, and there's going to be like this massive destruction again. So it's not really all good news. And then so like the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in Daniel's day was due to Israel's disobedience. He's like, we're out here in exile because we were disobedient to God, so he allowed Babylon to ransack Jerusalem. Okay, so but he's got to be thinking, what about the destruction, the future destruction? What about the future desolations of the temple? Is that going to be because of our disobedience or not? So it's got to be a question in his mind. So there's two key events again. Of course, much of Daniel's visions focus on two periods of history: the desolation by Antiochus Epiphanes in the Greek era, and then, of course, the coming of the heavenly kingdom during the Roman era. Again, the stone cut out not by human hands, and there's the Son of Man. But he doesn't see necessarily a temple being destroyed in that era, okay? But Jesus does, okay? So when Jesus arrives on the scene and he starts calling himself the Son of Man, citing Daniel 7, and he starts declaring that the kingdom of heaven is at hand, he's bringing up the visions of Daniel and the stone not made by human hands as coming and destroying that image, you know, that Nebuchadnezzar had in his dream. And he's also warning at the same time that the kingdom is going to be taken out of the hands of the present religious authorities. He's not focusing on the Romans. He's focusing on the Sanhedrin and on the priests and on the Sadducees and the Pharisees. He starts laying into them. He's not like on this big anti-Roman campaign, which is kind of what the Jews mostly expected from a Messiah, right? But instead, what he starts doing is that he starts calling himself the Son of Man, and they think, well, yeah, so he's going to destroy these kingdoms. But instead, he starts talking about their kingdom being taken away from them and being given to another. So he's taking Daniel 2, but he's putting it in a new context in a way, right? So Jesus is also associating the coming of the Son of Man that you have from Daniel 7 with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in AD 70. And this is one of the things that's really making them angry. They're saying, he said, you know, this Jesus fellow is saying that like he's going to destroy this temple and in 3 days he's going to build it back up, that he's able to do this. And it's not what Jesus said exactly, but they are seeing that he's saying that like this temple is going to be destroyed. And as far as the building back up in 3 days, he's talking about his own body. So they're not understanding what he's saying. So we'll give like three contexts here, or 3 or 4 contexts. This is the pre-exilic context. So before Daniel's day, this is the context, okay? These are the things, this is the context leading up to Daniel's time. So Judaism, and I'll just put that in quotes, right? The old covenant basically is illegitimately being practiced, or it's being practiced poorly. You see all this when you read the prophets, it's all about like how the priests are not practicing what they're supposed to, and that they're bad shepherds or abusive shepherds, and that the people are all being led astray, and that they're just all doing their own thing. And God starts warning them that this is not going to last forever, and I am going to hand you over to an enemy. So, you know, they get the warnings of exile because Judaism is illegitimately being practiced. The people don't have real shepherds, or they have corrupt shepherds. You see lamentations about that, like in the book of Ezekiel and other prophets. It's these shepherds are eating the sheep and all that. They're being abusive shepherds. And then the Spirit of God is about to leave the temple, because the Spirit of God had come in there like with smoke and fire, like into the temple or in the tabernacle. But Ezekiel has this vision of the Spirit of God leaving the temple, but in that same vision, he sees the Spirit of God also going to Babylon. So he sees that like God's going to be with them in their exile. You know, so God's Spirit is going to be upon his scattered sheep. So in Ezekiel's vision, the Spirit of God leaves the temple towards the east, leaves out of the eastern gates, and it goes across the valley. I think it's the Kidron Valley there, and he lands on the Mount of Olives. So the Spirit of God. So keep that in mind. Leaves the temple out of the eastern part of the temple, goes out of the eastern gate, goes across to the Mount of Olives, sits on the Mount of Olives, and then after that, after a while, continues and goes on to Babylon eastward. Right. So keep that vision in mind because Jesus is going to reenact that. So Daniel's context. By the time you get to Daniel, Judaism, the old covenant, is not being practiced. It's like I said, it's on hiatus. The sheep have been scattered and they basically have no shepherds. They can't really go to a priest and they can't really bring sacrifices anywhere. Daniel does kind of like what he prays towards Jerusalem 3 times a day. We see that in Daniel 6, no, actually we see that in the lion's den. Yeah, I think that's Daniel 6, right? And he prays to where the temple would be, even though the Spirit of God is actually left there and is with him in exile. It's almost like he's praying, with the faith and the hope of returning to Jerusalem. And he knows exile will end after 70 years, but in a prophecy that we're going to cover in a couple of weeks, he's like, yeah, you're going to go, 70 years is up, but there's 70 times 7 years that are appointed for your people, Daniel.
They're appointed for them for exile?
Well, it's kind of like, what's he mean by that? What's God mean by that? It's like, it's kind of like, yeah, you're going to go back, but exile is going to continue. And even with the remade temple and rebuilt Jerusalem, it's not going to be the same. And if you follow that prophecy, it's also going to bring you to the Messiah figure, who is going to come during the Roman era. So he's leading Daniel to like, don't be looking necessarily for the rebuilt temple in Jerusalem. There's stuff after that. That's going to also be ransacked at some point. But there's more to come, right? So after the exile and after, Daniel doesn't really get to go back because he's too old, I think, anyway. But when they go back and rebuild it under Ezra and Nehemiah, the temple in Jerusalem are rebuilt, but things aren't the same. In other words, the Jews come back there, but you hear some of the old people who were there 70 years ago, and they start crying when they see the new temple. They're like, this isn't the same. And where's the Spirit of God? And it's just not right, So
Nehemiah built it with the right heart and stuff.
Yeah, I think so, and I think it's like a partial thing and some appeasement, but there's no record of God's Spirit coming back and resting in the temple. It just doesn't have the glory from the Davidic days and from the Old Kingdom, right? And they don't have their kingdom. They're still under the thumb of another authority and at that time it's the Persians. So they never actually have their own country until 70 years ago from today. Like 1948, right? So they're like they by the time they get into the Roman era, they're still talking exile, and we're in Babylon. They call Rome Babylon because Babylon by this time has become like a prototype of it's an archetype, And there are shepherds, so they reinstill priests. They find Zadok, who is a Levite, and the sons of Zadok, they take over the priesthood. So there's shepherds, but the sheep are still mostly at large. Most of the people haven't come back. They don't come back to Judea. And when they do go back, there's a lot of people who have intermarried they end up being the Samaritans. So the people who are,
Oh,
yeah, they're like so a lot of them have stayed there, but then like the Assyrians and the Babylonians have brought in all these other people because they like to kind of like rip people from their homeland and place them somewhere else, so they couldn't like they so they wouldn't be united,
yeah, that makes more
and
sense.
Mm.
yeah, and also so they couldn't like launch revolts as easily and stuff like that. They would do stuff like this, and so it was the Persians had a different policy. The Persians were like, go back to your homelands and rebuild, and they're a lot more diplomatic in that way. But like the but the Babylonians, they weren't really that way. So they got new shepherds, but the sheep are still at large. And you're going to find out that those shepherds become kind of corrupt anyway. A lot of them during the Greek era, they become very Hellenized. You even have a high priest who changes his name to a Greek name, and he's trying to get Jerusalem to adopt more of like the Greek culture and stuff like that.
They were still under a tyranny in a sense.
Yeah, they're yeah. It's just kind of like they're being handed over from kingdom to kingdom. So the Maccabean context, this lasted from this started in 164. So Antiochus Epiphanes, he slaughters a bunch of Jews and desecrates the temple and does some of the nasty things that we discussed earlier. And then there's some Jewish warriors who are called the Maccabees. They launch a revolt and they actually win. So that rededication of the temple, and there's some folklore associated with it that like, they couldn't light up the menorah with the right kind of they had to have they only had so much of the right oil to light it up with. And while more was being acquired, it miraculously stayed lit for a whole, but these are all like parts of, yeah, this is all like part of Hanukkah, right? Yeah. And so these Maccabees, they established the Hasmonean dynasty, and they assumed control of Judea, which they have for almost 100 years, right? And so, well, for 100 years. And an aristocratic class called the Sadducees. Um, they're named, by the way, the Sadducees are probably named after Zadok, right? Like the Zadokites or the Sadducees. But they control the priesthood, but they're not actually sons of Zadok. So they actually receive a bit of criticism even in Jesus's day. There was like a high priest, but there was another person that a lot of people consider to be the legitimate high priest. And these guys became really abusive anyway. They were overtaxing people, and they were killing. They were uh, carrying out like assassinations to take over the priesthood and the kingdom, and they were just treating the people like fodder. So there, a lot of them are like illegitimate priests, but there were still some priests that were actual Zadokites, and they were actual. Uh, so not all of the priests were Sadducees. Um, maybe all of the high priests were. I don't know, but so like when you get to the book of Luke, think Zechariah, right? Zechariah is a genuine. He's a genuine Levite, and the book of Luke is going out of their it's he's going out of his way to tell you Zechariah's background to prove to you that he's an actual Levite. But that's important in the book of Luke because a lot of them weren't.
He's
That's
the one in the Chosen series, right?
no, he's not. This would be,
Oh
and
no.
he's the one who's the father of John the Baptist.
Oh, that's Zechariah.
Yeah, that's Zechariah. Yeah, I think you're thinking about what's his name? Um, uh, oh man, I'm drawing a blank. Well, anyway,
The one that could have went with Jesus, but he chose.
yeah.
That was exactly.
No, no, that's Nicodemus.
Oh,
Yeah,
Nicodemus.
Nicodemus. Um, so the sheep are scattered, or they're abused by their shepherds. They're still kind of scattered out there. And again, where's the presence of God? Think of this: Antiochus Epiphanes could not have strolled into the holy place without being fried.
Is Antiochus' name in the Bible?
No,
Oh, okay.
no, but he's pointed to by visions of Daniel. Is he the next chapter that we look at is going to bring you to the Antiochus. Yeah, so in the if he would have walked into the temple when God's presence was there, I mean the Jews wouldn't. I mean they were like, you don't just stroll in there. I mean God burned up a couple of the first priests in Moses's day by like offering strange fire. It's like this isn't what I required. They get drunk and they go in and do their priestly duties, but they're careless about like what incense they light, and God just burns them on the spot. So yeah, there was like even uh, there's even like people have said that they would like actually tie ropes on the ankles of the priest when he went into the Holy of Holies in case he was struck dead and drag him out. I don't know if it's true or not. That's part of the tradition. Yeah. So yeah, exactly. It's like I don't want to go in there. So like Antiochus couldn't have just strolled in there if the presence of God was there. So that became kind of like a question. Where is God's presence? So now you get to Jesus's context. So Jesus comes explicitly for, quote, the lost sheep of Israel. Remember, he tells that Samaritan woman, I've only come here for the lost sheep of Israel. That's what he's calling them, right? And he says, he looks at them and he says that, and he was sad because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So that's who he is trying to save out of there. So and at the same time, while he's not delegitimizing the offices of priests and other authorities, he lays into the spiritual authorities and he starts warning them this kingdom is going to be taken away from you and it's going to be handed over to another. And in the middle of that, he starts also warning them about the destruction of the temple. So if you think about like that parable he has of the vineyard, like the vineyard owner goes away for a while, and then and he sends servants, and they kill them, and they abuse them, and so he finally sends his own son, and they kill him too. And he says, "What do you think's going to happen to them?" And they're like, he's going to take the vineyard away from them and he's going to put somebody else in charge. But all of these parables, when you look like especially between Matthew 20 and 23, these parables are about him he's like, I invited, you had dibs on the banquet, but like you're not coming. So I'm going to get people from the streets, highways and byways. And he's targeting them as like, he's targeting the sheep. And John is saying, even John the Baptist is saying, repent because the kingdom of God, it's coming. It's going to be right here. It's at hand. And when the teachers of the law come, he calls them a brood of vipers. And he's like, why do you think you're going to be like spared? The axe is laid at the trees. You're going to come into judgment. Repent, this is, the only way out of this. So Jesus connects this whole process to Daniel 7 by identifying himself as the Son of Man, and at the same time, when he does that and he's talking bad about them, he's associating them with the beast of Daniel 7. Because he's like, you're going to prosecute not only me, you're not only going to kill me, but you're going to prosecute my followers. And I am your Messiah. What do you think is going to happen to you? So if you don't think it was, that God was tough on people for persecuting the prophets who are warning you about exile, what do you think is going to happen to you when you kill his only son? That's kind of the message that he's giving them. So Jesus's prophecies of the temple. So Jesus spends a lot of Matthew 20 through 23 lighting up the shepherds of Israel. Many of his parables are about them. And he goes to Jerusalem and he laments their rejection of him, and he prophesies Jerusalem's desolation. So when he rides in on that donkey and he starts crying, he's like, Jerusalem, oh Jerusalem, how often I would have gathered you like a hen gathers her chicks, but now look, your house is left to you desolate. And when he's going to the cross, he tells the women who are crying for him, he goes, don't cry for me, cry for yourselves, O daughters of Jerusalem. And because he's warning them of the destruction that's coming. He goes into the temple, right? He overthrows the tables and he's furious about what the temple has become. You've turned it into a den of robbers and whatever. And then he leaves the temple. He goes outwards, eastwards, and he rests on the Mount of Olives. So what he's doing is that he's reenacting Ezekiel's vision about God's presence leaving the temple and resting on the Mount of Olives. So he's doing the same thing that Ezekiel had in his vision, right? Babylon would destroy that temple, and the new Babylon, which is Rome, would destroy this one. And while he's on that temple, on that Mount of Olives, he gives the Olivet Discourse. That's where the disciples come up to him and go, and they go, look at this beautiful temple. Look at and he goes, yeah, not one stone of it is going to be left on top of another. And they ask him, when will these things be? And what's going to be the sign of your coming? In other words, your coming would be the coming of the Son of Man, right?
Like the return, man?
No, we think strictly in terms of God's second coming when we hear the coming of the Son of Man. Yeah. Okay. Now there is that, okay, because there is a second coming. He says when he disappears on the cloud, or he goes up on the clouds, right? They're told he's going to come back in the same fashion on the clouds. Yeah. This is all Daniel 7. You'll see the Son of Man riding on the clouds. But what he tells the Sanhedrin right before he gets crucified, the night before he gets crucified, he calls himself the Son of Man. And he says, and from now on, you will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven and sitting at the Father's right hand. He says, from now on, you're going to see the Daniel 7 events.
Yeah, I just read that in Mark, and I was like,
yeah.
Why is he saying from now? Does he mean after he goes up in the clouds in a few days?
No, he's talking about his coronation. He is going to be made King of Kings. And he sees the crucifixion as his coronation event. And when when he's risen from the dead, he tells his disciples, okay, all authority has been given to me. Go therefore. So in other words, they become the ones who take over the kingdom in Daniel 7. So so we think strictly in terms of his second coming. His saying coming of the Son of Man is him riding on the clouds and having the kingdom given to him, right? So he's and he has had the kingdom ever since his resurrection. And it's been given to his saints. We rule and reign with Christ. All authority has been given to him. So that's an already event. Like that's why I say, I'm in that camp of already but not yet. It's there's some things that we know still have to happen, because his disciples before when he rises from the dead, before before his ascension, they ask him, are you going to establish your kingdom at this time? And he's like, it's not for you to know when that happens. So in a sense, it hasn't happened, but in a real sense, it already has happening, and it is happening during that time. So he gives the Olivet Discourse from the Mount of Olives, and he proclaims that the destruction of the temple and the desolation of Jerusalem. So after he's been ascended, this is the apostles' context, right? And this is the context from which all of our New Testament books are written from. Okay, they're written between the time that Jesus has risen and gone to heaven and AD 70. It's written between that time, with maybe the exception of Revelation. Okay, there's a dispute about that, but so the from the apostles' context, that Christ is the chief cornerstone, cut out not by human hands, of Daniel 2. When you see that, he's the chief cornerstone that the builders rejected. The builders rejected Christ. The builders are the authorities, the Jerusalem authorities, right? And so the human builders have rejected it. And Jesus is their good shepherd. He says, I'm the good shepherd.
Yep.
In other words, he's become their high priest, and you no longer are sheep without a shepherd. I'm your good shepherd, is what he told them. So he is also their high priest, and he's their sacrifice. So they are now the temple of the living God. This is something that Paul's like putting together, right? He's like, we are being built together as a temple, being built not by human hands. Against Daniel 2, right? The presence of God fire that came onto the temple and tabernacle originally, that smoke, that fire that went into the Holy of Holies, the same fire that comes into the tabernacle in the past is now lands on them in Pentecost. It's these tongues of fire that land on them and identifying them as the holy place.
They would have recognized that, you think?
Yeah, that's what that this is imagery that they've grown up with.
Yeah.
They're like, this is what this means. The Holy Spirit is saying, I'm landing on you now. So they're putting it all together. They're and like when we read the book of Hebrews, it says we have come to Mount Zion and the New Jerusalem. They're like, this temple can't be destroyed. It's not made by human hands. No kingdom's going to come here and destroy this kingdom. Jesus tells Pilate, Pilate asks him, "Are you a king?" He goes, "My kingdom's not of this world." And on one hand, you could say, well, he's not really a threat to Rome then. But on the other hand, it's like, there's nothing you can do about it. This kingdom's going to take place, and no other kingdom, no earthly kingdom is going to touch it. So I am going to establish my kingdom, but it's not like what people thought it would look like. It will probably eventually look a lot more like what they had in mind, but it's not going to be made out of a bunch of people who are rebels and are going to try to overthrow the system. Yeah, it's not going to be like done by like some physical army probably, or I don't know how it's going to work out, but so all authority has been given to Jesus, the Son of Man, and they are ruling with Christ. In fact, here's something from Ephesians 2. It says, but God being rich in his mercy, et cetera, et cetera. But when you get to verse 6, it says, and has raised us up with him. Think of the Son of Man being, seated next to the Father, right? In Daniel 7, and seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus. So the Son of Man, the coming of the Son of Man, of course, involved. Remember where we were looking that like sometimes it was saying, and they ruled and they did this.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it was a he statement and sometimes it was a they statement. Well, we are the they, and we are seated with him in heavenly places in Christ Jesus. So Paul would say other things like our citizenship is in heaven, and from it we await a savior. So there's definitely like always like that strain of like this is already happening. You have come to Mount Zion. You have come to a new Jerusalem. You have come to a place where there's a festal gathering of angels and the spirits of those made holy, etc. Like when you read Hebrews, this is where they're coming from. or the right that writer's coming from. So here's the ramifications. Since the new covenant, the new temple and this sacrifice are now in place, it means that the old covenant and the temple and the sacrifice, they all have to go. You can't be having the old covenant being practiced indefinitely, right? So yeah, somebody's still unmuted. I think it's Chris. Uh, anyway, if you could mute yourself for now. So all of that went away in AD 70. Think of this. The old covenant in Judaism was on hold during Daniel's day for 70 years, but the old covenant in Judaism has not been practiced for 2,000 years. When we talk about Judaism today, it's nothing like Judaism. It's not old covenant.
Yeah.
It's not any covenant that's being practiced since AD 70. I was listening to Stephen DeYoung like last week, and he was saying that after AD 70, at least the Christians, the Christ followers, they had the Eucharist, they had the communion, which is like, so they were still practicing Judaism because they were celebrating Christ's sacrifice.
That counted, you think? That was considered Judaism at that time?
If there's no difference, I shouldn't put it that way. Judaism, Christianity is the continuation of Judaism.
Yeah.
If you want to define it like as a covenant, right? Yeah. Judaism after AD 70 that's being practiced like Judaism today is not covenant Judaism.
It's not like the lineage of that God wanted it to be.
No, it's not the practice of the Mosaic law. So when you get to you'll see a little bit more like where I'm going with this. We think so much in terms of Israel versus the church, but the biblical writers aren't talking that way. They are saying that like this is Israel, but the Gentiles have started coming into the new covenant. It's the continuation of Judaism, and I don't even know if like I want to call it Judaism, but it's the covenant people. The covenant people goes from the old covenant Judaism into the new covenant, which was promised to them. What we have is the new covenant that started back, that was promised, from the start. And what Hebrews is pointing out is that, like these are the fulfillment of everything that we practiced as Jews. Christ is the fulfillment of all of those things that we practiced as Jews. And so what you have in the first century is not Jews and Christians, I should say before you have the Gentiles coming in, it's not as if you have two religions. You have Judaism where they don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah, and you have Judaism where they say this is our Messiah.
Oh, that's an interesting way to say it.
Yeah. So like so New Covenant Judaism is alive and well since the coming of the Son of Man. So the apostles and the Son of Man, the coming of the Son of Man began just as Christ had told the Sanhedrin. So like that's what's happening in their days. Jesus had also told his disciples that the Son of Man would come before some of them would die, and before they had even reached all of the towns of Israel, before they could even preach the good news to all the towns of Israel, that the Son of Man would come. I'll show you those verses in the next slides, okay? Jesus' focus on the transfer of the kingdom had less to do with the transfer of earthly kingdoms from the Romans, and had more to do with the spiritual kingdom being transferred from Christ rejecting Israel to true Israel, Christ accepting Israel. Okay. So he kind of turned the understanding of Daniel on its head in a way. Like I said, they were expecting a Messiah and they were expecting a transfer of the kingdom, but he was like, the kingdom that's being transferred at this point is not from these worldly kingdoms to a worldly kingdom given to you. This is not made by human hands, and it's being taken away from you and it's being given to the lost sheep of Israel and to the to the Christ followers. And that's it's uh, it's the same kingdom though. So Matthew 16, it says, "For the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay each person according to what he has done." We think of this as a strictly future statement, right? Okay. He says, "Truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." He's saying this is going to happen in your lifetime, guys. So he's not talking about the second coming. And so, like, what's he talking about here? That he's going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father. And he's going to repay each person according to what he's done. There is a judgment coming, and it's going to come within their generation. It's kind of like what you're starting to see here in Matthew 10 when he sends out the 70. He's like, "I'm sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves." So, and he goes into all this stuff. Brother is going to deliver brother to death, and he's saying about all these things that are going to happen. And you will be hated for all by all for my name's sake, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. So he's talking about the persecution of his saints, right? When they persecute you in one town, flee to the next. For truly I say to you, you will not have gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. They've gone through all the towns of Israel 2,000 years ago. Okay. So this is something that's going to happen in their time. So again and again, you see Jesus saying the Son of Man thing is about to happen. So it's all like it's all there now. Again, I look at it as like already, but not yet. But he's definitely saying something's going to happen during their time. So the New Testament books, this is their context, okay? New Testament books were written between Jesus' resurrection in AD 70. The apostles practiced Judaism. They went to the temple and the synagogue. They celebrated the feast. They're meeting with Jews. They're doing all their Jewish things. The things that they're not participating in anymore, however, are like the daily sacrifices. They're like, Jesus is our sacrifice. This has been fulfilled. We don't need to do that anymore because Jesus is the fulfillment of what our sacrifices have always represented. Those things were modeled for us because there was a time when the real sacrifice wasn't here yet. And we have always practiced this in the hopes of the real sacrifice. Hebrews is all about that, right? So all of the original Christ followers were either Jewish or they were Jewish proselytes. They practiced Judaism as Jews in the New Covenant. So when we talk about like the conversion of Paul, there's nothing in the Bible that says the conversion of Paul. Paul starts preaching like almost immediately because Paul doesn't have to change much of what he believes. He just has to change everything he believes about who Jesus is.
Just one aspect,
because Paul is expecting a Messiah. He just doesn't think that Jesus is it. And when he sees that Jesus is the one who was sacrificed and all that, and he can start preaching really soon after that because it's not like he needs to be taught a whole bunch of different things now. He sees how this, he starts seeing really quickly how, and also with the guidance of the Holy Spirit, of course, that like, but Paul's got all the pieces there.
He wasn't like a baby Christian in that sense.
No.
Sense of, like it's not like he had no base.
Right. No, he's got a very broad base, and he knows what's going on. He just hasn't accepted Christ as the Messiah that he's been awaiting. So So we can't say like conversion of Paul as if he went from one religion to another. It's not that. He just has to accept that Jesus is the Messiah and quit kicking against the pricks. So in Acts 6, here's an example. They choose Stephen, they choose all these guys, and they choose this guy Nicolaus, a proselyte of Antioch. So if they all are proselytes, what are they? If this guy is a proselyte, what's he a proselyte to?
I had to look it up.
The revamped Judaism.
Well, but then aren't they all proselytes if they're so Nicholas is a proselyte, and it's a Greek name. He's a non-Jew who has converted to Judaism.
Yeah.
That's what a proselyte is in the book, in this part of Acts.
So
he's not
all proselytes because they saw themselves as still just being Jews.
They're still being Jews, right? Yeah, it's just that this Nicholas guy he's like a Greek guy who became Jewish, or he started following he's a proselyte to Judaism, so it's not as if we read proselyte and we think immediately, oh, he became a Christian. Well, they were all followers of Christ. Why there was that discussion. Yeah, it's like they didn't even know what to do when the Gentiles started coming in mass. It's like, do we convert them to Judaism first, or what do we do? Also remember they were they have to be circumcised and all that. And yeah, there was that explanation of circumcision. Yeah, so they're having to figure this out kind of like in real time, but they're not like, oh, we're starting a new religion. It's not like that. So we've made things kind of confusing by like creating in our minds a divide between Christianity and Judaism. In the modern sense, that's true, and especially like, well, what happened was like in the long run after the second century, the Jews didn't want the people who believed in Jesus to hang out in the synagogues anymore. So they were kind of being kicked out of synagogues, and they had to start their own kind of meetings. And so that's why they'd go to synagogue maybe on Saturday, but then they'd have their meetings on Sunday. So we get this tradition.
Is that how that started?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, but they were going to synagogues on the Shabbat, on Sabbath. They're all, being good Jews, Old Covenant passing away. So, like when you read Hebrews, here's one verse. It says, by calling this covenant new, God has made the first one obsolete, and what is obsolete and outdated will soon disappear. So he's writing this before AD 70. He's like, this is going to disappear pretty soon. This whole system of the temple and sacrifices, it will soon disappear. Hebrews is written before AD 70. So the Christians knew that the desolation of Jerusalem was coming because Jesus had said so. And so they began selling their properties. It's like, I'm not going to like hang around here, like, because sooner or later, this is all gonna like, like we can't stay here in Jerusalem anymore. Plus they were being persecuted, and a lot of them had, exited Jerusalem anyway. They were being chased out of there. The believers left before the Roman attack. And one of the verses that they cited was in Luke, I think 17, when it says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, let him who is in Jerusalem run to the hills, basically. So they went to a place called Pella. And there was also another prophecy that one of the Christians had prophesied. And so they were like, no, these Jews, they're going to launch a revolt, but they're not going to be successful. And we believe Jesus. And so we're getting out of Jerusalem. And they were saved by it, So why did the Jews who did launch the revolt, why did they think they could actually defeat the Romans? Well, ironically, it's because they had the book of Daniel. So they're reading it the way they want to read it. And so what was going on during that day was that the Jews knew from Daniel that the kingdom would come during the Roman era. They could see that plainly, right? They were also emboldened by the Maccabean revolt and its success. And then Joseph records that the revolt leading up to AD 70 was fueled in part by the prophecy in Daniel 2. He's like, that prophecy from Daniel 2 was one of the things that they were latching onto. But Josephus also records the proliferation of false prophets. There's all kinds of you're going to see false prophets everywhere. And many claim to be the Christ. And if you see one, hear of one being in an upper room or out in the wilderness. One guy met out in the wilderness and got like 3,000 followers, and they launched a revolt. And then the Romans started winning, and the guy who was their false prophet, he bailed on them and left them there to be slaughtered by the Romans. So a great leader there. But so it kind of left it open for like a lot of false prophecies to happen during that time, and these false messiahs, like I said, they led revolts that resulted in slaughter by the Romans. So some closing thoughts about this. Daniel's prophecies pointed primarily to 2 points of history that result in a desecration of the temple or the persecution of the saints and the persecution of the saints. One persecution is of the saints who endure and are connected to the physical temple. So the Maccabean revolt was like, when you read of the people who would not deny Yahweh and everything, it's actually pretty heroic, and they are saints. They expected that they knew that they would be slaughtered, but they were encouraging each other. You're going to have a better resurrection, from by resisting and even being killed. And Hebrews actually seems to cite some of them in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11. But the second persecution is of the saints by those who are connected to the physical temple. By the temple system. It's the people who run the temple are persecuting the saints. The people who are running the temple, the religious authorities of Jesus' day, they're the ones who are persecuting the saints. Okay, so it's a flip of the script. First one is like those who adhere to the temple, and they're saints who are being persecuted, in connection with the physical temple. But the second group of people are being persecuted by the people who are running the physical temple. That's why Jesus is like, yeah, this physical temple, it's out of here. And by the way, there's going to be a new temple. So, and it's not going to be made by human hands. So the saints are persecuted by who are persecuted by the second group. They are the spiritual temple, not built by human hands, as Paul says. But that leaves the question: if we're looking at a future abomination that causes desolation, are we talking about a new physical temple? Or are we talking about a temple that's built not by human hands? And the reason I ask this is that there are Christians who are looking for the temple to be rebuilt in Jerusalem. They're even giving money to it, right? Like to support.
Do they even talk about that anymore?
Huh?
Do they even talk about that anymore?
Yeah, and there's
because I haven't heard about that in a long time. I know that they have rebred the right colored cows so that they
there's always something about a new red heifer, and They want to like they have there's always like things going on like that, you know. I don't know how far it's gone, but my thing is like, why are you even looking for a temple, physical temple, to be rebuilt if after having gone through all of that, you know? It's not like, first of all, I don't expect God to go and inhabit a newly made physical temple.
Well, we're talking about the people that don't believe in God and having their hearts because
They haven't accepted Christ.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, why would and Christ isn't the spirit is inhabiting his temple on earth, which is not made by human hands. So it's not like a thing where like I'm looking for something in Israel to happen and like, oh goody, here's a new temple being built. If there is a new temple that's going to get built like in my lifetime, I don't think I'm going to be excited about it, you know, like because I'll be happy, you know, that the Jews can kind of like do what they want and, you know, have their own, you know, land and I mean, do that. But I don't know. Other than that, it's like I don't expect God to dwell there, and it's still they're rejecting Christ.
Yeah.
So it's not like a good thing. Now, a lot of people that talk about Daniel and prophecies in Daniel will also, you know, talk about, you know, like, well, when we see this happen here, you know, in the end times, uh, you know, like the Antichrist is going to come into the holy place and desecrate it and all that kind of stuff. And I'm kind of like, is it legitimately a holy place? You know, so there's questions about that. You know,
I think it could almost be like something about Christians get like that are the temple now, like desecrating it by sin or.
Hey, that's another like an approach that I've thought about. You know, is there something that's gonna because we know that there's going to be a you know, I expect a falling away and apostasy. So is it going to be corruption from within the church itself?
Man, I never heard that or thought of that.
Yeah.
Maybe there's never going to be some evil guy standing in the rebuilt temple. That could all just be our.
Yeah.
It makes more sense that it'd be within the body of Christ now.
I think so. Yeah. That's why I like this time around going into because last time I taught Daniel like, you know, like 20 years ago or whatever to a youth group, I was thinking all the, you know, conventional like um you know what do you call it? Dispensational kind of like theology about like eschatology and everything, you know, but like looking at the way that Jesus treated Daniel 2 and 7 especially um is I'm like Jesus was talking about something in his generation and warning about it, and it came true. And the coming of the Son of Man, we're part of that. You know, Jesus has come, and we are in that kingdom, and all authority has been given to him, and we do rule in the heavenly places. We don't think of it that way, but you know, Jesus said all kinds of things about it. So when you listen to preterists are like all of that's already happened. Okay, so when they look at Matthew 24, they're looking at it and they're going, yeah, there were all kinds of false prophets. There were signs in the heavens. I can show you right now, like the things that Josephus records. There are kinds of signs in the heavens. Literally, they like a cross appeared like over Jerusalem, and there was another thing that like a cow that was going to be sacrificed gave birth to a lamb, like really bizarre things that were happening in Jerusalem the years coming up to AD 70. And if you read Josephus's account on that, you know, it's pretty freaky. And there's a lot of things there that like I kind of felt like after reading some of Josephus, I was like, I felt cheated. Like, how come I never knew about this? Because I was going, so much makes sense once you know what happened coming up to 80, 70. I'll go over some of that stuff. I went really long tonight. But we'll pick apart a little bit more of that And I thought that like that's kind of like the framework I wanted to give you guys, because it's kind of like there's everything else that we can speculate about in the coming prophecies that Daniel's going to have. But I don't want to focus so much on the things that we have to speculate about that are in the future. I want to focus this time around more on the things that did happen. And I'm not a preterist, but I think the preterists do bring up some really good points. And it's I think it's a good thing to just listen to some preterist teaching on this, because you don't have to agree with everything that they say, but it gives you the already a lot of the already part. A lot of the Randall Deeb was one guy that like was really preterist in his view of Revelation, and him and I had like a good conversation or two, and I was starting to see, I was starting to see that too,
in certain aspects.
Yeah, a lot of it, and like the more I think about it, the more I'm going, boy, there's stuff like even in going up to the end of Revelation that makes sense, and with that point of view, things that they never that I don't even that they've never even brought up, but uh, it's always a journey, right? You start piecing these things together. I hope that helped you guys in some way or whatever. I don't know.
So you're saying that really you want us to kind of view Daniel from that through the context of the stuff we talked about today.
Yeah. I kind of want to give you like a framework, because Daniel's prophecies really focus on between his time and when Jesus comes. And what most Christians don't know about is what even happened during that time.
Yeah. It's not in the Bible.
It's not in the Bible, right? But it is in the Bible in Daniel's prophecies. And why is he giving us those prophecies? Why is he talking about like those two times? It's not like a random thing to like when it happens, see, God knows what's going to happen, and here's some random events. It's like they're significant events because they uh they're transition points. They're transition points, right? They're like, well, something big is going to happen, and it means something for us.
Like you said, it points to the Son of Man.
Yeah, it points to the Son of Man. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it brings our focus back to like, wait, the Son of Man thing has already happened. There's a big already aspect to it, and I know there's a not yet, but we tend to like in Pentecostal circles we tend to think of only the not yet part. Yeah, which we don't know how that's going to unfold. So, but we can look back and see what's already happened for sure. Okay.
Well, I know you were talking about the temple, and if they're going to rebuild it or not rebuild it. Myself personally, I don't think it'll be rebuilt, because it talks about the new heaven and earth in chapter 21 in Revelation.
Yeah,
it talks about God bringing the temple down.
Yeah, the heavenly Jerusalem coming to earth, right?
Yeah.
And so what's the purpose of like even having a new temple, physical temple?
Yeah, because it's even there, it says God himself shall be with them and be their God.
Right.
He'd be with us.
Yep. There's not even going to be a temple.
Yeah.
In the end, right?
Right. That's what I don't know, as far as a temple built by God, that I don't have that configuration in my mind. I don't have that kind of imagination. But I just know from what it says here, just to keep it simple, he's bringing it down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband.
Yeah. But in I forget if it's Revelation 20 or 21, but he says, and there was no more sun, and there was no more sea, there's no more temple.
Yeah.
There was no more temple because like God is his
Yeah, the
temple.
first, if you read I guess about the first 5 verses of chapter 21.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole point of temple was that like this is where God is residing with man.
Yeah, to start in the old, like you said,
But that's all that temple means. It's like the presence of God with men. And so he tabernacled among us. It was first, God's presence with where he tabernacled with the Jews among them, and the presence of God was with them.
Yeah.
But then Jesus is the temple who he tabernacled among us. But then ultimately, it's like you are the temple of the Holy Spirit. You there is by the way, it's a collective. We always teach it as like your body is the temple. It's like it's a collective thing. It's like it's a temple built of many stones. It's a temple built of many stones, and you and I are part of it. Yeah. Jesus being the chief cornerstone.
Amazing.
Yeah. Incredible. So
pretty awesome.
But that's going forward. I kind of wanted this to have a little bit of that and a lot more of that in our head, and that's kind of like anyway, you get it.
Yeah, it's kind of weird for me because you're kind of saying some stuff that could possibly blow out of the water, like a lot of framework for how I thought of Revelation and the second coming of Christ,
Yeah.
And even like about the abomination of desolation. Now I'm like thinking, oh, that doesn't have to do anything necessarily with the temple ever. That could be
not a physical temple.
I think it could be an attitude or a bad morals that modern church takes upon itself almost.
It could be.
Yeah, possible.
Yeah. This is still kind of speculative, but it'll make sense when it happens, I think.
I think that now that I'm thinking
I think we're always good at hindsight.
I feel like
exactly.
I feel like, geez, the abomination could be in the temple now, bro.
Yeah.
Could be.
There's a lot of sin in the church, and that's not. I don't mean our church in particular. I mean the church in general. That's interesting.
God always gives us enough to be like to hopefully understand it while it's happening and like in hindsight, but never enough to let the enemy know what he's going to do in the future.
Yeah.
I never thought of that.
Oh yeah. Like Paul said, if the authorities, if the rulers of this world, and he's talking about the spiritual authorities, right, would have known, they would not have crucified the King of Glory. In other words, if he had spilled the beans about exactly that Jesus's death was going to be their undoing, they wouldn't have done it. They wouldn't have been lured into it. But instead, what he did is that he punked them, or whatever. He got them to.
Phone lines are tapped.
Yeah, he lured them into like that bad situation. And that's kind of like they were like, oh my gosh, what have we? Yeah, he duped them for sure. That was a head fake, but all the pieces were there about like in hindsight, it's like, okay, it all makes sense. But that's why sometimes Jesus would be like, hey, nobody knows the day or the hour, and like it's not even up to me who like is gonna sit on my right hand or left hand. That's up to the Father. And there's some things that God keeps for himself, but he gives us little pieces of the puzzle, which we kind of guess to. If there was nobody who would have put all the pieces together during Jesus's time and said this is going to happen, nobody did that. But a good handful that once they saw it, they were like, oh, okay, this is what was meant. Yeah. So I expect the same thing in the future. So anyway, I'll stop recording now.